Our next speaker is Eva Raymie. Eva's introduction to the field of conservation biology started with her research on desert elephants in Namibia. She has a diverse background working in terrestrial wildlife biology, marine ecology, and education around the world. She chose to come to the MAS MBC program because she wanted to expand her knowledge and skill set in marine policy and marine spatial planning. While Eva has been at Scripps, she has really soaked up every opportunity that's been presented to her. As an accomplished dive instructor and technical diver coming into the program, she took the first possible opportunity to take the scientific diving course, which allowed her to volunteer throughout the year on diving-related research projects, including supporting the Hubs Aquarium and Phil Zarofsky with local marine collections. She completed 2 independent study courses this year, including working with the scientific diving team to deploy deep sea landers and acoustic receivers, and she worked in Greg Rouse's lab, where she did DNA extraction and ran PCR for deep sea organisms. Eva is a talented and experienced scientist who really has used her time here to get as much as possible out of her 9 months. Many courses were taught remotely, so she took advantage of that and took 4 audited classes, including phylogenetics, biostatistics, advanced statistical techniques, and R programming. And you will hear from her today. She put many of these skills to use in her Capstone project. The title of her presentation today is Sharks in the Shallows, Examining Coastal Shark Distribution Patterns in the Florida Keys Archipelago.
Thanks, Samantha. If you go for a swim on a healthy coral reef, this might be what you see. I know that for some, swimming on a reef surrounded by sharks might seem scary, but hopefully, even if it does, then this seems even scarier. Sharks have been swimming in the oceans for over 400 million years, but now they're facing a severe threat: humans. Oceanic shark and ray populations have declined by 71% due to an 18-fold increase in fishing pressure over the past 50 years. And sharks are also highly susceptible to climate change and anthropogenic, meaning human-related impacts. So the long-term consequences of their global depletion is uncertain, and it's therefore of great concern. Sharks are generally known as apex predators, and they play a vital role in maintaining the resiliency of coral reef ecosystems. But it's less recognized that different shark species can actually play a variety of important roles in the trophic structure of coral reefs, and not all sharks are apex predators. Also not commonly known is that sharks are long-lived, they have slow growth rates, and they produce relatively few offspring at a time, sort of like humans. And I chose to focus on shark distribution patterns in the Florida Keys for my project because this archipelago is unique. It's made up of over 1,700 islands, which are all encompassed by the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. So the map on the left shows you that the no-take areas cover under 1% of the sanctuary's total area. And the map on the right shows you the barrier reef tract, which stretches along the outer edge of the archipelago, and this is North America's only living coral barrier reef. So as coastal development in the Florida Keys continues to grow, those impacts can be seen in the marine environment. And so the goal of my project was really to try to figure out what are the primary drivers of shark distribution patterns in the Florida Keys. And these are the 9 species that were the focus of my study, and they vary greatly in their size and also their life history characteristics, including their mobility, their site fidelity, their habitat preferences, and their roles in the food chain. So in 2016 and 2017, researchers from Global FinPrate surveyed the entire Florida Keys reef tract using baited remote underwater video systems as part of a worldwide assessment of coastal shark populations. And in 2019, they also surveyed the coastal waters off the city of Miami. And for my project, I identified these 4 geographical regions, which I broke apart based on natural breaks in their video sampling. And of the 376 survey sites represented on this map, 131 of them observed at least one shark. Baited remote underwater video is widely used as a non-invasive survey technique, and each one consists of a GoPro camera that is mounted on a frame with a bait pole that's in the field of view of the camera. And when I first came to Scripps and I started talking to my advisors about getting involved in this research, it intrigued me because 5 years ago, I worked as a field research assistant and I deployed these video systems as part of the worldwide assessment of coastal sharks conducted by Global FinPrint. So in some ways, the opportunity to analyze this data set and to work to answer these research questions felt really full circle to me when I came to graduate school. And so my first task was to try to collect and organize the data sets I needed to analyze. And specifically, I needed to gather data on environmental and also anthropogenic impacts to test if they were driving shark distributions. So I started by brainstorming a list of variables that were hypothesized to be significant based on previous shark research. And then I chose this list to prioritize just a limited number of those variables to focus on. But when I started, the variables that are highlighted didn't exist. And there was no readily available data for them. So I really had to start by creating those 4 new data sets. So I did this by using ArcGIS Pro software, and I calculated the percentage of reef habitat at each survey site. So on the left, you can see that I broke apart all habitat that was not considered a type of reef and removed that from the map. And then in the middle, you can see a diagram of how I drew a circular buffer with a 100-meter radius around each survey site and calculated what percentage of that was hard coral. And then the map on the right shows you the intersection of those buffered survey sites and the habitat represented as a percentage of reef habitat for sharks. And I also had to quantify fishing pressure. But without any reliable site-specific data on fishing pressure in the Florida Keys, I first tried to do this by quantifying the distance from where sharks were observed to the nearest human population center or to the nearest marina. But human population growth is so widespread and boats have such a wide range that didn't prove to be very informative. And so with help from local scientists, we chose to instead quantify boating and fishing pressure by measuring the distance from where the sharks were seen to the nearest mooring buoys or to the nearest sanctuary preservation areas, which, as you can see on this map, are very small and they're few and far between. So after running some exploratory statistics in order to finalize the variables I needed, and combining and organizing all these data sets, I started running statistical models. And all of this involved a lot of computer coding, a skill set that, I will be honest, I avoided for many years while I worked as a field biologist, but one that I am very glad that I now have. And by immersing myself completely in the language used by the R software, I found it to not only be an incredibly useful tool, but it was actually fun. So I ran several types of analyses, but one of the primary tools I used included creating binary logistic regression models, where I created a full model with all of the variables, and then I used a selection process to develop best fit models, and then I generated a table of the statistically significant variables that were driving the occurrence of shark species. So this table shows you those results, but you'll notice that only 4 individual species are represented here. And the reason for that is because there wasn't enough resolution in this data set for me to generate meaningful models for all species because some were so rare. For example, there was only 1 tiger shark and 1 bull shark seen in the entire Florida Keys. But from this analysis, some interesting trends started to emerge. And so for our purposes today, I want to just highlight a few of these trends. So I'll start with fishing pressure, and then I'll talk about reef habitat, and then region. By far, one of the most surprising findings of this study was that large migratory species, such as the tiger shark, the bull shark, and the great hammerhead shark, were shockingly low. And his previous research in this area really points to historic widespread fishing pressure as possibly being the cause for this. And we also hypothesize that maybe their depletion has caused changes in the distribution of other shark species as well. So in the early 20th century, gillnet fishermen who operated in the Florida Keys reported landing roughly 100 sharks per day. And even to this day, the recreational charter boat shark fishing is an important industry in the region. And also related to fishing pressure was the result of no fishing zones. And so initially I imagined these sanctuary preservation areas to be regions that would be free from human disturbance. But I quickly came to realize that that's not the reality. These areas are quite small, and because they are strategically placed to protect live coral, they draw a lot of attention from tourism and recreational snorkeling and diving. So the Caribbean reef shark, which is often known to be resident on specific reefs, was less likely to be seen close to these areas, potentially due to the increased human presence there. So the second key driver I want to talk about is reef habitat. And I found that shark occurrences in the Florida Keys were influenced by the percentage of reef habitat at each site. And of the 131 locations where sharks were observed, over a third of them had more than 25% reef habitat at the site. And I want to point out that while the amount of reef habitat was shown to be a primary driver of shark presence, sharks are mobile and they use a wide range of habitats, so we can't necessarily assume that they will all react the exact same way to the same ecological factor, such as more hard coral. But on the other hand, the fact that higher percentages of reef was positively correlated with higher shark occurrence could mean that we should argue for the protection of more coral reef habitat in the Florida Keys. And the last driver I want to talk about is region. The Upper Keys held the greatest number of sharks, but as you can see in the graph that's on the left, for species richness, a larger variety of sharks was seen in the Middle Keys, and only 2 species were seen in Miami. And the graph on the right, showing the biodiversity index, follows that same trend. So this could be indicating a larger pattern of habitat degradation that's occurring in the Miami region, but that finding needs to be examined further as it wasn't able to be fully quantified within the scope of this study. So from these findings, we now have a better understanding of the primary drivers of shark distribution patterns in the Florida Keys. And this study showed that many factors drive shark distributions, including fishing pressure and coral reef habitat. But more broadly, why do these findings matter? Well, we know that fishing pressure has caused declines of some species. But in order for us to continue to track those changes and continue to track future changes, more monitoring of current recreational shark catch in the Florida Keys is needed, as well as data on boating and fishing and tourism impacts. We also know that shark species in the Florida Keys utilize many different habitats, but that coral reefs are an indicator of shark presence. So the significance of increasing no fishing zones around reefs or creating more artificial reef habitat could mean that not only sharks, but also their prey are more protected from the increasing fishing pressure. And ultimately, the implementation of further conservation efforts aimed at protecting coastal shark species will hopefully allow us to regain a glimpse of the historic populations that once existed in the region. And so to wrap things up, I want to take a moment to thank my Capstone Advisory Committee, Davi Kesev, Heidi Batchelor, and Tomo Gucci for all of their support and guidance on this project. And this project also wouldn't have been possible without the support of Mark Bond, Jeff Carrier, and the other field team members, students, and volunteers who conducted these surveys in the Florida Keys. And I want to thank the MBC cohort and staff and my family and friends for their support. Thank you.
All right, so we've got a question coming in from the web. Oh, many apologies. How about I do this one, and then we'll get the in-room question. Okay, so Bob Ellis says, you mentioned that potentially historical fishing pressure caused the decline of some large species, which in turn influenced distribution of other shark species as well. Could you expand on that a bit more?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I mentioned, 2 of the species that have been predicted to be impacted by that fishing pressure include the bull shark and the great hammerhead shark. And both of those are top predators, and they also prey on smaller sharks. And so it's possible that their depletion may have caused changes in the community structure on the reef. So for example, bonnethead sharks, which are quite small and are sometimes known to supplement their diet by eating seagrass, and are a prey species from those larger predator sharks, were quite numerous in this study. And we expected to find them in more shallow protected waters, but they were quite far out on the reef. And so that may suggest that they are able to expand their range a bit due to a lower level of predation out in those areas from sharks and other predators.
Hi, Eva. Good job. So you mentioned that 1/3 of shark sightings were on coral reefs. What about the other 2/3? Were they in any particular habitat? Who saw them?
That's a great question, John. So I said that over 1/3 of them had more than 25% reef habitat. The point of the surveys was to survey reef habitats in general. So all of the survey sites were chosen on an area that had at least a 10-kilometer long reef tract, but it's not continuous in the Florida Keys, it's more patch reef. And so in order to avoid destroying live corals, the survey sites may have been chosen right next to the reef. So if it was placed in the sand, yeah, the sharks may have been using both of those. So that's why I quantified percentage. But we did see they were utilizing seagrass habitat and sand flats, and different species have different preferences for how they will hunt in those areas. So, yeah.
And we have one final question from the web. How would you improve upon sampling to provide more resolution for future management decisions regarding shark conservation? And what changes to policy are needed to achieve that?
I think I maybe know who asked that, but
Do you want to call them out?
no, it's okay. Okay, so I think the first part of the question was what changes are needed to increase resolution. I think having done these surveys that it's extremely important that we gather environmental data in situ, so in the water with the survey, so it's not just the video. And that would give us a lot more information about the environmental factors that are happening. I sort of created those using outside data sets, but that would definitely help. And then I think the second part was about management and what changes in management need to happen for that. And I would say that that's a bit of a complex question because these surveys fall into both federal and state waters, so there's different laws that govern both of those regions. But I would say that permit systems for shark fishing can provide us a lot of data on where sharks are being caught and provide some of that information for us. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.